I am the Programs and Events Coordinator at the Idaho Nonprofit Center. I'm glad that you all could join us this morning. I would just like to introduce the National Council of Nonprofits and just give a warm welcome. We appreciate all that you guys do for the sector as a whole, and we love our partnership with you guys. So thank you for having us here for the webinar this morning. And with that, I would just like to tell everyone that you will be muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat bubble and they will answer them throughout the presentation or hold them towards the end. With that, I will turn it over to the National Council of Nonprofits. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good morning, Idaho. I am David Thompson, Vice President of Public Policy with the National Council of Nonprofits. With me is Tiffany Gorley, State Policy Counsel, also with the National Council of Nonprofits. Our topic today, it's a misleading title. The topic is not how to politicize nonprofits, but what's wrong with the idea of politicizing nonprofits. What charitable nonprofits and foundations need to know and what you can do about it to preserve, protect, promote nonpartisan nonprofits and to keep election-related activities out of our sector. That is our theme. It's a very hot topic. Just on Monday, Vu Le's column, a monthly or a weekly blog on nonprofit issues, usually very funny, wrote about this issue and encouraged folks to engage. So we thank all of you who are on the call for engaging, for joining us. And also, this is actions in Congress going on this week, next week, and on into the fall related specifically to this story. So you're catching this at a very hot time, and we're thrilled that you are here. The National Council of Nonprofits is made up of state associations of nonprofits. We could not exist, we could not be effective without you as members of the Idaho Nonprofit Center and members, 28,000 nonprofit members across the country belonging and engaging in their state associations. The and engaging part is important because Amy Little can send out an email seeking quick information about a public policy challenge that may have shown up in the legislature or a regulatory issue that may be popping up in Idaho. And she'll get feedback from 10 or 20 states in a matter of an hour of colleagues who will drop what they're doing to help out. And at the same time, Amy has been very good, and all of the folks at the Idaho Nonprofit Center have been very good at helping their colleagues elsewhere in the country understand issues, learn what's going on, sharing good ideas that spread across the country. We always deal with bad ideas all over the country. It's better when we get the good ideas that are homegrown in Idaho and spread the rest of the country. So your membership in the Idaho Nonprofit Center is a membership in the National Council of Nonprofits and is a membership in that whole network that you see in front of you. We all benefit from each other's collective engagement. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being on the call and for caring enough to spend some time with us. What we're going to do today is go through the topic of identify what the Johnson Amendment is, what it is, and why it matters. We'll explain all that as kind of a 30,000-foot level overview. Then we're going to take a step back to go into background, the conditions, why we're 501c3 organizations. We're going to talk about nonpartisanship and what it means in the real world in Idaho. Then we're going to get into the hot topics, what the administration is saying about the Johnson Amendment and partisanship, what various legislative challenges are on the table and need to be dealt with, and then what you can do about it. Never want to just whine about an issue. We always want to have an action, steps for action to solve the problem, which is the nonprofit way. So let's get started. The Johnson Amendment, what it is and why it matters right now. What you see on the screen there, don't need to take notes. You will get the slides, and I suspect everyone on the call has read this before. This is Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. We're going to use this as our background for about half of the program. The reason is we all live under this law. We live and operate through it. And it applies, the key point here is this applies to all 501c3 organizations, whether you are a house of worship, whether you are a food bank or a museum, or whether you're a private foundation. These rules apply to us. And So let's go on. The Johnson Amendment itself is that last bold clause that you see on the wallpaper on 501c3. It says that to be a charitable nonprofit, you do not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distributing of statements, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. There's been a lot of comments and explanations of the Johnson Amendment that veer far and wide from those words you see on the screen right there. That's all there is to it. That's what it is. This is interpreted to mean just two things. One, as a 501c3 organization, we do not endorse or oppose candidates for public office and don't contribute money, time, or resources to help elect or defeat candidates for public office. That's it. Those who oppose current law, and there are many folks who want to do away with the Johnson Amendment, do away with current law, usually have two reasons. There's a third reason we'll get into later. The two reasons are, one, it limits free speech. Usually it's the concern about a preacher preaching from the pulpit, preaching the gospel, preaching beliefs, right matters of faith, and then going to the next step of endorsing candidates as part of that. The argument is that the federal tax law shouldn't be restricting that speech. As we're going to see, most of us have restricted speech in one way or another, and there's a trade-off. Also, the argument is that this allows and empowers the Internal Revenue Service to intrude in church affairs. In fact, and in law, the IRS has not been intruding in church affairs or many nonprofit affairs for a good long while. But that's the argument, that's the allegation. On the side of most of us promote and protect and are strongly in favor of keeping the Johnson Amendment as it is. One reason is that nonpartisanship is in our DNA. I was talking to a reporter of a national publication just an hour ago. He wanted to talk about charitable deduction and who nonprofits are bringing to lobby Republicans, since Republicans are in the majority here in Congress. And I pointed out to him that we don't really have to change our lobbying strategy because one party is in power or another party is in power, because we are nonpartisan by law and fact and are respected as problem solvers in our communities. So we don't have to send the Democratic charities to the background and bring out the Republican charities to the foreground. We're all about communities and we're all about problem solving. That's one of the great strengths of our sector, and we would like to keep it that way. Okay, so that's the background. Now that's the big issue in a nutshell of why we're here and why this matters. But let's take a step back and talk about the benefits, conditions, and history of the nonprofit community. Why the heck would anyone choose to be a 501c3 organization? We get calls, I'm sure the Idaho Nonprofit Center gets calls every day of folks saying, I want to start a nonprofit, tell me how. First question we ask is, why? I say that partially facetiously, but everyone on the call knows it's not easy being 501c3s because there are a lot of hoops we have to jump through, a lot of things we have to do. And being committed to our mission is number one. But why would anyone choose 501c3? Well, there are two very big benefits. Number one, we are exempt from federal income taxes. That's a big deal. Other organizations are also exempt from federal income taxes, but many states also say if you are a 501c3 organization, you also are exempt from state sales tax, income tax, use tax, a variety of things like that. I did not check Idaho law before we got started today, so I don't know if for sure that applies in Idaho. But certainly in other states, and I suspect in where you are, being recognized under federal law is a condition, or at least an aid to also being exempt from state law. So it's a big deal in terms of not paying taxes. The second issue, though, is even bigger and unique for 501c3 organizations. We are eligible to receive tax-deductible donations. That means we can tap into the $200 billion, the $300 billion a year that's given voluntarily and freely to the work of charitable nonprofits in communities. Not everybody can say that. Not every nonprofit can say that. As you see on the screen, other 501c organizations cannot accept charitable donations. The donations to a labor union, donations to a social welfare 501c4 organization, or to a chamber of commerce, those donations are not deductible from the individual income taxes of the people giving the donations. It's the 501c3s that give the charitable deduction. And that's important because a lot of people want that deduction, and for the same reason, there are rules limiting which organizations can provide that deduction.
We have a quick comment while we're talking about taxes, and specifically taxes within Idaho. The comment is, my understanding is that many of us nonprofits in Idaho do pay sales tax. However, it's hit or miss whether or not a particular nonprofit is exempt from sales tax.
Thanks for raising that. That's a critical issue. We're not going to spend much time on it. Different states have different exemptions. Every state exempts the property of a charitable nonprofit that's owned and used for its charitable purpose. Sales tax across the country is hit or miss. Not every state has sales tax, but at the same time, frequently we see, especially in the West, we see that the exemption frequently goes for the nonprofit that had the lobbyists that got the exemption. So it's not a blanket exemption. I recognize that, and I appreciate you raising that issue. That is a topic that we at the National Council of Nonprofits are very concerned with, and have been working with our colleagues in Arkansas and Mississippi in particular, because they have the same, they're not West, but they have the same challenge. We believe in Minnesota has had this issue a great deal recently, of trying to extend the sales tax exemption to all nonprofits. That's a benefit of participating in the network of state associations, because they can learn from each other. But I do appreciate the point being raised. I was saying that the charitable deduction, or the charitable deduction and tax exemption flow from being a 501c3 organization. Those two benefits come with conditions. Condition number one is no private inurement. Long-term for no part of the earnings. That's the nonprofit part of our name. We can't pay dividends. We can't pay shareholders or make exorbitant salaries and things like that. As the rule, that law has actually been around since before we had an income tax. The second condition is probably the one that's the most confusing, not the subject of this webinar, except in passing, and I know that you can get additional training and information through the Idaho Nonprofit Center. I'm sure Evan would be happy to put on some programs in this area, because this is an area of great confusion. The law says that we cannot spend a substantial part of the activities. I'm not going to read it because it's a convoluted and painful sentence. That's where most of the gray area comes from. In the arguments on the Johnson Amendment, people are alleging that churches and other charitable nonprofits cannot talk about abortion, cannot talk about immigration, cannot talk about compassion and charity and tax policy, and all of that's false. The language says that there are limits on how much lobbying, legislative lobbying, that a charitable nonprofit can do, a 501c3 can do, but there's no prohibition in the statute, because that's the exact language. And I highlight the language on the screen that's underlined was added in 1976. This was an attempt to try to make things a little more clear. That's called the 501H election. Nonprofits can take the 501H election and live under more an objective standard of what is lobbying, clear standard of how much you can spend on lobbying. That's a benefit. Again, it's not the subject of the law of this webinar. I only bring it up because this provision, 501H, does not apply to churches. They got themselves opted out, or it doesn't apply to them. They didn't want it covering them in 1976. And I'm wondering if that might be a way of fixing some of the problems there. we're belaboring the point on the screen here because much of the confusion about what is and is not permissible under federal tax law relates to this question of lobbying. Too many people call legislative lobbying engaging in politics. In fact, it's advocacy, which is open to all of us as opposed to partisan election-related activities, which is what I call politics. The third item is the third condition is the one that we're talking about today. That is the Johnson Amendment. It was added in 1954. During the tax reform debate of 1954, then Senate Minority Leader, not Majority Leader, but Minority Leader Lyndon Johnson offered the amendment. In 1954, Republicans controlled the House and the Senate. It was offered in the Senate. The Senate Majority Leader accepted it. House accepted it as well, and President Eisenhower signed the Tax Reform Act of 1954 that included the Johnson Amendment. Interestingly enough, this language that you see there was copied and pasted into the Tax Reform Act of 1986, signed by President Reagan, and then that language you see on the screen there, underlined, was added in 1987 to toughen the law to remove loopholes because the issue was non-controversial, was non-partisan or bipartisan all the way for most of its life. To recap on the law, the benefits are tax exemption and eligible to receive tax-deductible donations. And then the conditions are no private, the nonprofit part of our lives, no private inurement, limited lobbying restrictions, and then nonpartisanship. Let's move on to nonpartisanship as a concept and how it's affecting our lives. Tiffany.
So we'll talk about this more later, but we have a letter out right now that we are collecting signatures on for organizations. And what you see on the screen is a collection of logos that have been added to that letter from organizations within Idaho. So we wanted to show you that this is a very representative of the support that we're getting across the state, but also this is closely mirrors what's happening across the country with all the different organizations getting involved. But we are also collecting not just the logos, but comments that different organizations have added into their signatures. And some of them are very, very poignant and show how important it is to use the Johnson Amendment and have this protection whenever they're doing services within the communities. So the Selkirk Outdoor Leadership and Education or SOL in Sandpoint says, please support the effort for keeping nonprofits out of partisan politics. As an experiential education nonprofit, SOL's mission is to provide transformational experiences that empower participants to become active learners and responsible stewards of their community and its environment. We believe this is best accomplished through objective educational opportunities that allow participants to explore, achieve, and lead in novel learning environments without subjective facilitation, fostering the opportunity to develop and comprehend subjects based on their own interpretation of the evidence-based facts. The Snake River Community Clinic in Lewiston says, nonpartisanship in America's government is what America is all about: equality, inclusiveness, respect, and freedom. Please choose to be the best representative and champion of America's charitable nonprofits and foundations by protecting that with which all of America holds in high regard: true democratic representation in this great republic of ours. 501c3s agree to be bound by respectful and reasonable rules. Please do the same for us. And the United Way of North Idaho, it says, United Ways are represented in every zip code in the United States through more than 1,200 locations. The longevity and success of United Way in bringing organizations and individuals relies on the fact we are nonpartisan. The integrity of these collaborative efforts will be at risk with the repeal of the Johnson Amendment.
Thank you, Tiffany. We're going to switch to the actual challenges that we're facing right now. The comments that you just read and the comments we get to read every day are always inspirational to us because perhaps it's embarrassing to me, but I discover frontline nonprofits that are dealing with real life challenges and problems in advancing their mission usually can say it a whole lot better than we can here in Washington, D.C. That's why we are talking to you now. We want to learn from you. That's why we engage through the Idaho Nonprofit Center, because the real work is going on in communities, and the more we know, the better we can advocate, but at the same time, the more we know, the better we can connect the decision makers to those who know what the real consequences will be. So please do continue to share your comments, your thoughts, your observations with Evan, with Amy Little, and with the folks at the center. So we're going to talk about the challenges to nonpartisanship. What we're going to be talking about are public policy issues. We're not we're not in any way being partisan in what we're talking about. I'm sensitive on the topic of the difference between policy and partisanship, because when we launched our comprehensive campaign in support of nonpartisanship, we got some nasty grams from a few people saying, "How dare you be so partisan in defending nonpartisanship?" And I got confused. I finally realized that people were thinking, well, the president wants to do away with the Johnston Amendment, so if we're opposing his position on the Johnston Amendment, we must be being partisan against him. Well, actually, we're in support of the nonprofit community. The nonprofit community is heavily in favor of nonpartisanship, and we're not being partisan, we're being nonprofit. And we think that's an important distinction. Bottom line, politics, partisanship, bad, we don't do it. The Johnston Amendment says don't do it. Advocating for our missions, advocating for public policy positions, free reign, absolutely, let's go for it. So let's talk about the issues presented. On May 4th, President Trump convened a Rose Garden ceremony. It was a beautiful day, very much like today in Washington, D.C. And he pulled together a variety of heads of different individual churches, synagogues, mosques, to have the ceremony to sign an executive order. What he said about the executive order and what the executive order actually does don't quite jibe. He said that for too long, the federal government has used the power of the state as a weapon against people of faith, bullying and even pushing Americans for following their religious beliefs. You are now in a position where you can say what you want to say. I would quibble as to the restrictions on speech, restrictions on the ability of people of faith to speak their views, but his statement that you are now free to say what you want to say is not reflected in the executive order itself. It's a long sentence, 98 words, and we've only put a bit of it on the screen. And I'm not going to read it because it is he didn't write it, it was written by lawyers, and it's very awkward. I'm a lawyer, I can besmirch my own class. The executive order, many in the media reported that the president has instructed the IRS not to enforce the law. Number one, he can't instruct the IRS not to enforce the law. And number two, the president cannot undo a statute duly enacted by Congress. What the executive order actually says is that if the Internal Revenue Service has not considered certain speech improper in the past against other groups, it can't all of a sudden start saying it's improper against houses of worship or against churches. No real change there. No one's been accusing the IRS of planning to do that. The argument, the statements in the press, or the various reports in the press, were that this was the president fulfilling a campaign promise, checking a box, demonstrating that he's doing something. Many commentators from the conservative, faith-based side said it didn't accomplish very much. I spent some time on it because the impression is that the president has changed the law and that it no longer applies to houses of worship. The law still applies to houses of worship as it does to all of us on this call. And the media, if you see a reporter, or if a reporter asks you, what do you think about not having to follow the Johnston Amendment anymore, hope you will correct the record and let them know that the executive order does not change things. What could change things is legislation. What you see on the screen there is a picture that Tiffany took from our seats at a House hearing on that same day, May 4th. That was the hearing itself was designed to make the case for changing, make the case against the Johnson Amendment and to highlight abuses that various nonprofits have suffered over the years, and to make the case for weakening the law. There are two bills mentioned on the screen there that I'll go into in a moment. There's a third item that's actually more pressing that I'm going to come to. So as you're thinking through this, know that there are multiple ways of skinning the Johnson Amendment cat that are being pursued by the law's opponents. At this hearing, the purpose was to make the case that current law is intolerable, nonprofits are suffering, and that an easy fix is available. The arguments that were presented by the witnesses, you see them on the screen, are that number one, it limits the free speech rights of nonprofits and that it intrudes in church affairs. The three pieces of evidence raised at this hearing, and this was the one formal hearing on this issue that we've had this year. The pieces of evidence were, number one, the citation to two cases from 20 years ago or more that the nonprofits won and the IRS lost. The IRS challenged the tax-exempt status of two nonprofits, or two separate nonprofits in different cases, and the nonprofits won and the IRS lost a long time ago. Not an overwhelming record. The case was also made that the IRS is intruding in church affairs, and the evidence of that was letters that pastors have received from outside groups, not the IRS, saying that if you endorse a candidate from the pulpit, the IRS will take away your tax-exempt status. The complaint was that the IRS is lurking in the back of churches, and as soon as magic words are uttered, the IRS agent would swoop in and haul the preacher off. Absolutely not true, false, and interestingly, you can see one of the representatives on the screen. I won't tell you that he's the guy on the far right in the picture. It was a preacher from Georgia who was saying that he personally received letters from the IRS saying that he was threatening him with losing tax-exempt status if he endorsed candidates from the pulpit. It was a witness who said from the IRS, he said, oh, well, no, from an outside group, but they were saying the IRS would do this. So the arguments in support of repealing or weakening the Johnson Amendment are that the IRS is doing something that their evidence suggests that other people are actually just citing the law, like I've read to you at the beginning of this program. There was a third item raised, and that was from the Georgia preacher who's now a congressman, saying that this issue was that then Senator Johnson in 1954 was in a tough re-election campaign. He had a primary. He was being attacked from the right in the Democratic primary. Two nonprofits were calling him a communist. They were promoting a different candidate for the Democratic nomination. So the argument goes, the president, then Senator Johnson, had illegitimate purposes of wanting to silence his critics, so he put this amendment through. And the argument then goes forward that that was an improper reason for offering it, so there's no reason to consider it good policy now. There are a lot of reasons why Senator Johnson did this, and there's a serious dispute as to whether that was his true motivation. But more importantly, in 1954, there had been 16 hearings on the issue of abuse by nonprofits and foundations, whether they're communist infiltrated, whether they're promoting candidates and so forth. This issue of nonprofit engagement in elections was a very hot topic in 1954. In 1953, 16 hearings took place. So this was not some idle, out of the blue issue. This was something that was a hot topic, and Senator Johnson offered a solution that was unanimously approved by the House and the Senate. We think that's an important detail that is lost in this debate. The legislation, two bills you see on the screen there. The first one is a repeal bill. That one's been around for a long time, It's been offered by a relatively unpopular congressman from North Carolina, and it hasn't gotten much traction. He introduces it every year, usually does not have very many co-sponsors. We still see it as a serious threat to us now because President Trump says he wants to repeal and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment. This amendment would do that, or that legislation would do that. The chairman of the House Tax Writing Committee, a fellow named Brady from Texas, has said that when he writes his tax reform bill, he's going to put repeal of the Johnson Amendment in there in his first draft. So repeal is a live issue. And remember that if repeal happens, that means nonprofits can endorse candidates. That means nonprofits can siphon off charitable assets to run campaign ads, to contribute to candidates and that sort of thing, all without any registration or disclosure of donors and things like that. And that's why that issue isn't talked about as much by the proponents of weakening the Johnson Amendment, because the campaign finance issue alone would draw a whole lot of attention from just about everybody. The leading substantive bill, and there's an appropriations bill I'm going to talk about in a minute, but the leading substantive bill, and the one that was stressed in this hearing, is one that you see the bill numbers there. It was introduced by my majority whip Scalise in the House. Steve Scalise is a representative from Louisiana who was so savagely shot at the baseball practice in my hometown of Alexandria, Virginia. And he has not returned. He's still undergoing surgery and so forth. In the Senate, the bill's been introduced by Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, who is an ordained Southern Baptist minister. The bill, the language you see on the screen there is essentially what the bill says, that that a charitable nonprofit, not just a church, but all charitable nonprofits, would not lose its tax-exempt status if it's making comments, if it's endorsing candidates that's made in the ordinary course of the organization's regular and customary activities and carrying out its exempt purpose. So a preacher preaching from the pulpit would fit that. And de minimis, and results in the organization incurring not more than de minimis incremental expenses. So preaching from the pulpit, preacher's going to be talking anyway, so no new cost there. Sticking an endorsement in the weekly bulletin wouldn't be much more ink, so that would fit in there. So it fits what they say they want to accomplish. Unfortunately, it goes much broader. Let's look at the words and how they could be interpreted, how it would likely be interpreted in the real world if enacted. First is that the organization's regular and customary activities. The sponsors only talk about a preacher preaching from the pulpit. Don't usually mention rabbis and imams, but that's their argument. In reality, charitable nonprofits do their work in many different places and venues, and what's regular and customary varies depending on what the organization does. For instance, Tiffany and I both come to work by going through the Metro Center metro station in Washington, D.C. At the top of the escalator on 12th Street, there are some folks from a specific religious denomination who are always standing there. They're nicely dressed. They have their signs. They have literature. They're eager to talk to you about their faith and to recruit you and share their beliefs with you. They're there in a regular and customary way. Under this bill, those folks who are standing in one of the highest foot traffic areas of Washington, D.C. could start wearing campaign stickers, campaign buttons for Mayor Muriel Bowser, for instance, who's the mayor of D.C., or pass out campaign literature. They're using that special location to turn it into a political way station or partisan way station instead of the faith-based location that they've turned it into. But also you consider that food banks regularly have bags that they put their food in, or boxes, and quite often the name of the organization is printed on the side. It would be regular and ordinary for them to pass out boxes with their name on it. The backside could all of a sudden start having political contributions, or putting political endorsements on the other side, so that it's actually turning their regular and ordinary materials into campaign literature. I can imagine a donor saying, I'll pay the printing cost, the extra printing cost, or have the donor say, I'll pay 10 times the printing cost if you'll support my brother who's running for office, and that sort of thing. That's turning the nonprofit and the things that they regularly do into a partisan activity. Next item is even more troubling. That's the de minimis incremental expenses. De minimis is not a term used in the tax law in this context. The closest thing we have is not, this would be applied to 501c3s. The closest thing we have is the term used for 501c4 organizations. 501c4 organizations are social welfare organizations. They can do partisan election-related activities. They can run campaign ads using donations, not tax-deductible donations, but using donations from various groups. The law says that current law says 501c4 must dedicate itself exclusively to its charitable purpose, or to its mission of education and so forth. The Internal Revenue Service interprets the term exclusively to mean 51%. Exclusively means a majority, so that they can spend 49% of the money that's donated to them, to 501c4 social welfare organizations, can spend that on pure politics in the rawest form, contributing to candidates and so forth. De minimis is a looser standard than exclusively. So it's not a far leap to presume that the Internal Revenue Service, under any administration, would interpret that broadly, not narrowly. But more concern is, even if de minimis is de minimis, this empowers a lot of shenanigans. Imagine if and it's not a great leap of imagination, imagine if the president of Notre Dame Catholic University were to send out an email endorsing a presidential candidate to all alumni. They have their names on a list. They're sending out and endorsing. You can imagine the desire of the candidate to get that that endorsement that would go to millions of people. It would be no extra expense of an email from the president of the university, but the benefit to the donor, benefit to the candidate would be huge, which means that a great deal of pressure is going to be inflicted on the nonprofit that has the good mailing list. Or think of the religious broadcasters or nonprofit broadcasters. Religious broadcasters reach 100 million Americans every year. That's a big audience. That's a third of our country that could be advertising, could be promoting candidates without without disclosure of donors, without identification of where the money's coming from, and the organizations are getting a tax deduction. We imagine that campaign money would flow into organizations that would engage in partisan endorsing of candidates and diverted from good nonprofits doing good work in communities. So that's the problem with that major bill. That's the big topic of discussion. This month, we're still in July, this month the bill popped up. It was a rider attached to the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. This rider, it's Section 116, does a variety of things. It is limited to churches, their auxiliaries, their conventions, and their associations. It would make it virtually impossible for the Internal Revenue Service to enforce the Johnson Amendment against churches endorsing candidates or contributing to their campaigns. The sponsor of the bill, of the rider, a fellow from Texas, actually acknowledged that the purpose of his amendment, Section 116, was to make it extremely difficult for the IRS to enforce the law when a church or an auxiliary engages in political activity of any form, way, or I'm forgetting exactly how I phrased it, but it's clear if churches are endorsing candidates or if churches are violating the law, the Johnson Amendment, the IRS would lose its funding if it were to enforce, unless it went through a whole bunch of hoops designed to make it impossible. The amendment passed the committee. It was in the bill. There was an amendment to strike Section 116 out of the financial services bill. The good news is it was a bipartisan vote in support of nonpartisanship. Some Republican representatives joined all the Democrats in voting to strip the language out. Unfortunately, it was not enough, so the provision stayed in the bill at a vote of 24 to 28. Floor action, the timing of floor action is uncertain. Today and tomorrow, the House is voting on some appropriations bills. There's talk that the House might delay its August recess and pass the other 8 appropriations bills, including this one. You may soon get a call to action from the Idaho Nonprofit Center saying, please call Representative Simpson and ask him to not vote for this bill or to vote to strip this provision out. That's to be determined, but it's a very live issue, and it's just one of the appropriations bills. And since appropriations bills can't change substantive law, instead, the writer says, puts a restriction on spending. It's a backdoor way of repealing, as the sponsor admitted. His whole purpose was to allow churches to endorse candidates. It just so happens in his district he has 2 very large churches that reach 75,000 parishioners every week, generally conservative churches, and I'm going to stick my neck out here and make a guess that he thinks those preachers are going to endorse him. Not a way to run government, and certainly not a way to damage the nonprofit community. But that's not the only bill that we're concerned about. The debt ceiling bill is likely to come up pretty soon. Quick refresher, debt ceiling is the provision of law that says the federal government cannot borrow more than X dollars, that's the ceiling, the limit, without congressional approval, and Congress has to raise that level of spending. Congress has already run out of, the federal borrowing has already reached that level. The Treasury Department is now engaging in what they call extraordinary measures to not have to borrow more money. The Treasury Secretary was quoted recently as saying that they're having to reach into the crazy drawer to find ways to not borrow more money in terms of alternatives and ways of getting around this for now. Doesn't look like Congress is going to vote this week to raise the debt ceiling, more likely in early September. And the debt ceiling bill is always legislation that attracts provisions, conditions, items thrown in to buy votes from various parties. The Conservative Freedom Caucus generally supports repealing or weakening the Johnson Amendment. So we're watching that legislation. We're concerned about that as well. I've already mentioned that tax reform is legislation where you could actually reform tax law, and the Johnson Amendment. So we are engaged there. The Idaho Center is engaged there, keeping track of things, and they will let you know. And we're concerned about any other legislation that pops up that has a close vote, and Speaker Ryan may need to curry favor or buy some votes with the Johnson Amendment. So there is no rest here as long as Congress is in session, because troublesome amendments can pop up at any time. Now, I'm going to sum up here with some rationale and arguments, concerns we have with the legislation to repeal, any legislation to repeal or weaken the Johnson Amendment. A concern that real, legitimate, forthright nonprofits that are nonpartisan could lose donations as donors see that others are contributing and the donors want those others to endorse candidates they like, or they're concerned that these nonprofits are all political and I don't trust any of them, so I'm going to stop donating. Either the money to you gets rerouted to nonprofits that will endorse candidates, or the money, or there's a general shrinking of charitable giving. Expanding dark money, nightmares. Dark money is the term used for money contributed to politics, but you don't know who donated it. 501c3s do not, and 501c4 social welfare organizations do not have to disclose our donors. So that's why it's called dark money. But we can see if any of these proposals are enacted, that people will give will start using charitable nonprofits or even donor-advised funds to advance their political partisan agendas instead of the missions of the organizations. General pressure on donors to require nonprofits to endorse candidates. Under current law, if a donor or a powerful politician or a unscrupulous political consultant comes to you and says, I want you to endorse my so-and-so, you can say no, and you can say the law backs me up. Take away the law, take away the absolute protection, and you and we are all under constant pressure to make an exception, to change policy, to do the wrong thing. Finally, the weakening the law would turn boards into the swamp, the arguments, the challenges we all hate, which is, imagine most of us at Thanksgiving tables say no talking partisan politics or religion. Imagine boardrooms that become nothing but debate fests of supporting candidates for, against. Polarizing function is obvious, and the board's wasting time on partisan politics and not devoting itself to its purpose, which is the mission of the organization. Bottom line, no win, all loss for everybody except politicians. Now, all of that is, I've been on the whining, the negative side. Tiffany, is there anything at all these folks can do about it?
Yeah, so we like to end every webinar with next steps that you can do. And the first thing and the biggest thing and the easiest thing that we encourage you to do is sign on to our community letter in support of nonpartisanship. This is available at givevoice.org. And what you see here is the logos again in Idaho, but the one on the left is all the national organizations that have signed on across the country. So if you have signed on, thank you. If you haven't, please go to givevoice.org, and then we request that you share it with 3 of your colleague organizations. So you are in good company when you do sign on. So we have over 5,000 organizations that have signed on already, and this represents the charitable, philanthropic, and for-profit organizations. So it's really important to know that this is at the organizational level. No individuals are counted in that 5,000 number. And you are in good company with the Idaho Nonprofit Center, us, Salvation Army of Boise, United Ways, YWCAs. Foundations have signed on, over 500 foundations, community foundations, public foundations, family foundations have gotten involved. And this is very important because foundations usually do not get involved in policy efforts. But we have a letter, a legal analysis that shows that this is involved in the self-defense exception. So we encourage foundations to get involved. For-profits have also gotten involved with this. These are consultants, attorneys, Smith's Food and Drug, anyone that you know on the organizational level that is willing to join in and show how important nonprofit nonpartisanship is for the community and for the sector is welcome to sign on from the organizational level. After you do that, we have a couple other suggestions for you. Calling into your senators and representatives. This doesn't need to be a scary call, just a quick, hi, my name is Sally from this organization. I'm a constituent, and I really care about protecting nonprofit nonpartisanship. I think that you should keep the Johnson Amendment. That's all you need to say. It's really quick and simple, and there has been studies done here on what is the most effective advocacy that the staff and members of Congress think, and the overwhelming choice is always calls from constituents on issues that matter to them and their communities. So nonprofits represent every single district in every single state across the nation, so we have a very strong group that can get involved in this, and we encourage you to pick up the phone and make a very simple phone call. The next thing you can do is set up meetings with your members of Congress. So you can come to DC, we'd welcome to have you here, but you can also set up meetings in your district. And this is a great way to build relationships with the district offices, to get your organizations some face time with the district and show them how involved you are in the community and the work that you're doing. We also have some insider knowledge here that one of our partners, organizations that we have been working on the Johnson Amendment with very, very closely, she used to be a district manager in Texas. And she told us that as a district manager, when they are home in August for the August recess that is coming up, the district managers are usually scrambling, trying to figure out how to fill their members' time while they're there. Because if they are left to their own devices and they just create all this extra work or start getting ideas that the district managers don't want to encourage. So you would actually be doing them a favor by setting up a meeting while they're home in August. There has been different discussions on when August recess will actually start, but it's something to get involved in now. So all you have to do is call up the district office and ask for a meeting, and you will be doing them a favor. The last thing that we encourage you to do is to write op-eds, and these do not need to be in the most well-known newspaper in the state or anything, just your local county newspaper, town newspaper. If you mention a member of Congress's name, we can guarantee you that that will be popping up on all of their staffers' Google searches, and they will read that op-ed. We encourage you to get involved by writing these and trying to get them out there, but also joining with other nonprofits. You can do joint op-eds, come from different perspectives. And if you need some examples or some inspiration, you can go to the givevoice.org page again, and we have about 50 op-eds listed there. So feel free to read through them, see what other people are saying, put it in your own words, and get it out there. As a follow-up to that is, if you do get them published, get a group of people together and write letters to the editors as a follow-up, just to keep the issue alive in your local hometown. So that's what we encourage. We are open to any questions you may have. The chat box is still live, so feel free to write in. But David, do you have anything else?
Just that this is a very live issue. The appropriations measure is going to be coming up, and then we have to fight it in the Senate as well. Less clear on where the Senate stands, less activity. So your two senators can have a great say in this issue, and can the more they know from you, the more impact they will have, the more willing they will be to stand up for the nonprofit community. As I was saying earlier, I was talking with a reporter and pointing out that most politicians recognize charitable nonprofits as the good guys in their communities, the people that they turn to, that they respect. They want to know, that's why they would like our endorsements. We want to keep it nonpartisan so that we can talk to anybody on the issues and be speaking from truth, speaking from our mission perspective, and not from what the politician wants to hear. So the August recess right now is when this issue is most live. I'm delighted that we're talking to you today, because Congress is about to come to you, and here's the opportunity to share.
Evan, if you would like, I'm going to unmute you now. If you would like to share any closing remarks you might have.
Thank you, everyone. I would just like to say thank you to David and Tiffany for your time, and we appreciate you educating us on this topic. And thank you to the Council of Nonprofits for all you do for us as a sector and for helping us stay stable and supported. So we appreciate everything you do. Thank you for everyone listening in today. I will email you all the PowerPoint and this video recording so that you can have that and can share it with some of your colleagues and those around you. And we just appreciate your time today and hope that you take action. I'd also like to let you know that we do send out a lot of email communication on this topic and others that are very important to the sector. So feel free to visit our website at idahononprofits.org to see some upcoming events and to subscribe to our emails. So thank you to everyone, and have a good day.